And this is why we're here today, because a lot of people think that that React is built with perfect security. I hear this from React folks all the time, Ron, where you just use React and you're good to go. Unfortunately, that's just not true. We have issues with React that a secure developer needs to be aware of. Now, before we get started, I want to introduce you to my good friend, Ron Paris. Now, I work with Ron at Manicode, but I'm a fan of Ron because of the depth of his understanding of JavaScript from a developer point of view, as well as from a security point of view. So Ron is, when you John, let's call you Ron. I'm gonna go with Ron today, Ron Paris, not
Thanks,
John.
man.
But I think the deal is that we need this specialized knowledge to do security. And a lot of folks that I've seen talk about React, they talk about it well, but not from the perspective of being a developer for many years doing production software. And this is where you come in, Ron, right? So you're currently, let's talk about who you are, and then we'll get to work here. Ron is currently training companies globally on building secure software with JavaScript. He recently worked with the NPM security team as a software engineer and a JavaScript security expert remediating vulnerabilities. He also worked in the Node.js security working group to fix vulnerabilities when the lights were turned off and nobody else was doing it. That's craziness in recent years. He also discovered many of the public React components that are used throughout the world and reported the first security bugs in a plethora of different React components. He founded 2 security conferences, one AppSec California, one with me at LocalMocosec in Hawaii, and he's a builder. He is a real-world JavaScript developer who does security as a secondary thing. And this is the perspective I don't hear often. And I'm not trying to shine you on, Ron. We need real-world developers who are willing to step into the security arena. That's where you fit in. So let's do this, Ron. That's my introduction. I'm a fan. Let's get to work here, Ron.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah. Well, I figured we've been busy, working together over at Manicode, on and off, mostly on for the last 3 years. And one of the issues that comes up often over at Manicode, and I've seen it, is that, Jim's just inundated with requests for secure coding advice and knowledge. And so we started recently coding up a dashboard for Jim. And this is what we're working on. So we've got the Manicode Secure Global Secure Code Operations Center. Oh, yeah. And what we have here is it's a user interface that shows Jim just where in the world people need his advice right now.
Ron, did you bill me for this work yet? It's gonna be real low cost, right?
Yeah. This is cheap. This is part of. So Jim comes in here. The idea is he comes in here on a daily basis and he looks at these blinking dots. And he just kind of picks from the list down here what he wants to work on. And like most security teams, Jim's got a lot of tasks.
I would like to note something, Ron. In this dashboard I logged into a few minutes ago, I noticed that of all the things I have to answer, there's only 2 severities. There's high, and then there's very high. And I'm like, where are the mediums? There's a lot of issues I have to go through, and there's no lows meet. It's all high or very high. Can you explain that?
I think people, they don't want to waste your time, right? Nobody wants to waste security teams' time. We're highly valued in the developer ecosystem. So they only reach out when they really need help. And so they reached out here for these high priority issues. And what we have in this dashboard is we've got the chat history, and I'm not going to click on these because there's some sensitive info in there. And we got the chat history of people who have been talking to Jim about their sensitive SQL injection issues, their servers had request forgery problems. And we've got them indexed by their Twitter handles here. That's like how we work at Manicode. It's mostly Twitter-based communications.
Twitter is everything.
Yeah. So let's say Jim wants to, pop on here and get one of these red lights to stop blinking. What he can do is he goes over here to his little chat window, and this will pop up his most high priority item at that point. So when he clicks it, you can see here, help me, Jim. This is coming from somebody out there on the internet. They want to know if they need escaping, which I've heard about escaping as a security control. Sometimes you need it. And it says that he's saying that a bug bounty said that he possibly has cross-site scripting. And then it has an accompanying screenshot. So we can take a look at the screenshot and see, exactly what they're dealing with. You want to pop into this one?
Just do it.
All right. Oops. looks like something bad happened there. That's
It looks like a
interesting.
little JavaScript alert went off. I never coded
Yeah.
that in this app. There's no JavaScript alerts in this app.
So that's weird, right? So this is some data we got from the user, and we're trying to review this screenshot. Looks like it was taken today, but something interesting is going on under the hood here. So I'm just gonna go into the little Firefox developer tools here,
Look at some
take a
code,
peek
Ron.
at what this thing looks like. Like any good React application, I've got some errors in the console. Okay, so when I pop over to this thing, you can see we've got an A tag being built up. It's something called an SC message file class on it. And then here we have an href that has our dreaded JavaScript alert 1 as its destination value.
Google research shows me that of all active XSS attacks that Google fields, a third of them, Ron, are JavaScript URLs. This is not a small class of XSS cross-site scripting or content injection vectors. This is like a giant percentage of how real-world apps are actually attacked, especially React.
Yeah, if you look back at the cheat sheets, that OWASP produced, you can find cheat sheets that talk about how to do cross-site scripting on a web page. And they'll have a lot of references to like weird stuff like VB scripts still working and scripts inside of CSS and data attribute scripting on that page and just all these different vectors that really don't work anymore, right? The one that's really still working is JavaScript URLs. Yeah, the other ones, there's some caveats that they don't work at all anymore. So that's why I think there's been a consolidation towards JavaScript URLs. And I've been talking about this for like 3 years. So anybody who listens to me is probably bored of hearing about JavaScript URL code injection. But the reality is, each time I join a company, that tends to be one of the vulns I get to fix, is there'll be some sort of, vulnerability related to these darn JavaScript URLs.
And it's not just an instinct, it's my instinct too, but it's also like real world vulnerability data, real world like firewall data I've looked at time and time again, like a third to a half of XSS attacks that are really attempted against production systems. It's going to be JavaScript URLs. And because React has eclipsed every other framework, and because React doesn't handle this very well, it's becoming even more important that we get this right, I dare say.
Yeah, there was a rumor. The new version of React has come out, React version 17, and there was a rumor that in that version that they might possibly block the JavaScript URLs.
Fake news, Ron. That's fake news.
Well, it came out and they didn't do it, so I guess
Fake news, Ron.
I still have a job this year. But what they did do is they did add a helpful warning in the console, which when you do get a JavaScript URL into your user interface, and it will give you this message now. A future version of React will block JavaScript URLs as a security precaution.
Oh, that really helps. That helps me. That's great.
This will be in the user's console if they end up with a cross-site scripting attack in their web browser.
And that helps us how? How does this help us, Ron?
Well, it helps the developers, because as a developer, if I'm working on an app and I'm happen to have some payload data, I guess, that has this type of vector in my test suite, maybe I'll notice this warning in the console. I guess that's where it might come up.
I'm being a snarky jerk a little bit. This is not useful to the developer. I mean, it's minimally useful. This is nonsense. It's minimally useful to alert a user in the JavaScript console that an XSS payload just fired off. This is nonsense. I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but
I tend to agree with you. Yeah, it's probably not the best place for that information. So I think that what they're worried about, though, is just breaking, compatibility with websites that use JavaScript URLs for functionality. And when the React API was designed, they went out of their way to make it difficult to get direct access to DOM nodes and inject scripts into them. I mean, you can do it with a ref, and you can do it with dangerously set inner HTML. You can set the contents, but React protects you. As we've talked about before, React does protect you, and it does do entity encoding on data that's placed into the children of a React element that's going to be rendered to the screen. So it has some protections. This is just one thing that they just didn't consider in the design, and then they'd known about it for years. It's been discussed endlessly in their issue tracker, and I think at some point there'll be a defense here. So this type of vulnerability won't be an issue anymore for people who upgrade to the newer versions of React.
I do appreciate your more professional reaction to this. Like when I see it, I'm like, I'm reacting a bit more with my Sicilian heritage. I'm like, what the bleep are you doing? It's right there. You could have stopped it at the framework. So you're going to give an alert to my users when a payload's firing? It's almost an insult. But I get your point. This is they're cautiously approaching this defense. They don't break a generation of React apps, which they would do. JavaScript URLs are legitimate inside of JavaScript frameworks. So I get your point, and I appreciate you have a more professional reaction as opposed to my more visceral one. But
maybe a more boring reaction. Actually, that's why I'm glad I have you on here. It's a little bit boring, right? Most, you know.
I know you very well, Ron, and I would call you many things. Boring is not one of them.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so you want to look at the code where the flaw is?
I love code. Ron, code all day. Let's do this.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing this window, and I'm gonna start sharing my other window.
A cowboy hat. Moving back to Virginia for the third time.
Okay, so here's our little application. What we have is this is just generated using Create React App, and there's like a primary app component, and then this app component is just displaying what we're seeing on the screen. Here inside of demo is where we have the launcher that launches Jim's chat widget, and then the widget itself is it's a patched version of a production library called React Chat Window. So if you go on NPM or Sneak Advisor, or one of these like search tools for packages, by the way, if you're not using Sneak Advisor, you should check it out. It's pretty great. And if you go over here and you look up React Chat Window, and then you go down into the components section, you can find these different types. So you've got a file message type, a text message type, and an emoji message type. And the one we're interested in is the file, right? Because that's the one where when we clicked it, the script went off. You with me, Jim?
I'm with you all the way, Ron.
Okay, so I'm just looking here at this React component, and it looks pretty standard. It just takes some props, and it's a function component, and then it just has some JSX in here for rendering an anchor tag with a few different props set equal to some values that were passed in as props. And then it has this file icon component. And then it has this paragraph tag where inside these curly braces, we're interpolating some data from props. So this was what I was talking about earlier here, where it says props data file name. That part is going to be escaped. So if you were to try to inject a script into there or any type of HTML into there, it's just going to get entity encoded, and it's going to be benign in the context of this paragraph tag.
My understanding is whenever I'm dropping data into our mustache in React, if it's in like a paragraph tag context like this, there's no way, nothing I can type in is going to cause an XSS here. This is absolute protection when I'm using JSX in something like a display only context, like a paragraph tag. This is great. And what we're looking at is we're in the chat where the screenshot was being displayed by user-driven content. This is the code that generated that chat message earlier.
Exactly. And so this is the part that said screenshot and then the date. That's just that text that's flowing in here through props. And then this prop that it's receiving up here, the href prop, it's the data URL value. And then this one's the props data file name value. So I can actually show you the shape of the data that we pulled in. And these were the chats that came from the back end. And the way that those look is they're shaped like this. So in each chat, we have an author, we have a type, we have some data, and then we have other optional data that was sent to us. And this is the data that the chat widget's going to use, that it pulls in order to render each message that we're receiving. So here, the data text, or let's go look at the file type. That's this one. So here we have
your coding style is so beautiful. Like, your code is not sloppy. It's so beautiful.
I just use prettier, and I do like auto format. I stay out of those religious wars, man. I just auto format, whatever people agree on.
I'm okay as long as it ends with like readable, organized code, so the next person doesn't hunt me down and like take me out. Because I'm serious. My first boss at GE, I'm certain Dave Reed is a serial killer. He had that look, but he was really a gifted engineer. And I looked up, like, what do you do if your boss is a psychopath? Because I'm afraid he's going to take me out. And the article said, just make sure you stay valuable and you're fine. Psychopaths don't take out valuable people in their lives. So I worked hard for him because he told me, Jim, I know you're going to leave. You're not going to stay here forever. And if I know where you live, and if you ever give me messy code and I find it out 4 years from now, I'm going to find you. So you better write code. You better write code so me in 4 years doesn't hunt you down and take you out, because you and I know who I really am. He said that to me, and he kicked me out of his office. And I haven't forgotten that moment ever, Ron. And I look at your code and it's like, I want to be handed this code. This is the way we should be writing code. It is beautiful, seriously.
Well, you could thank the prettier team. They're the ones behind the magic. I think standardizing on a format is the way to go. I agree with you. Okay, so what was going on here? We popped this thing open and I just switched it back to a more benign URL. So here would be an example of what it's supposed to do when it has a normal URL. You click it and it takes you to the code. This person's running an interesting theme. It's kind of hard. It makes their code kind of hard to read. But I can't see the vuln here. Now back here we've got the chat window. We're opening that up. We got the screenshot, but that's where the attack vector is. It's right here in this render. So if we look back here, let's replace this with the JavaScript stuff.
I'm gonna go with my Australian hat instead. I'm gonna do a hat change. Oh, that's way better. You got this. Don't let me just distract you, Ron. I'm a very distracting person. Please don't let me distract you, Ron.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so I want to go back to this being the JavaScript URL for a second, because I'm going to try to build a defense into that React component. So even if you pass a JavaScript URL, it's not going to do script execution. So we'll be able to receive data, and someone can set the URL to something that potentially contains JavaScript URL, and
gotcha.
It's not going to affect us.
This is someone who's basically like using Burp to intercept a multi-part form request when they upload the screenshot, and they're and they're doing some Burp modification of the file name. Real trivial to do this kind of attack.
Yeah, I think there's also like a functionality in the web browser where you can go to any request in the network tab in developer tools and right click copy as curl, and then you can just rerun those anytime you want. So then you can just manipulate that data. So yeah, this is definitely attacker controlled. And I'm just really gonna go over here and check this out. Make sure my vector is still working. Yep. Okay. So how do we code against this? How do we protect ourselves? Now, there's probably some really great ways to do this using browser features. Like you could maybe do something related to trusted types, or you could do some content security policy stuff. But the reality is, if you want to ship something today that prevents JavaScript URLs, what you're probably going to find yourself doing is some version of the code I'm about to write, which is you're going to come in here.
But before you do that, can I say one quick thing before we go there, or as you're doing this? Now, why does JSX is encoding at the paragraph tag, the href attribute, and the download attribute? They're all still encoding. So everyone's asking, why does this still execute? Because if you take a URL and you run it through an HTML encoding function and put it in an href attribute, it still executes. Every browser is built that way. It's URL to be entity encoded, and it will decode and run the URL.
You used to talk about this a lot, which is, which encoding are you using, right? Which encoding you're going to use is all about where in the document do you plan on putting the thing. So when you're going to put the thing in the text content of an element, you need a certain type of encoding. If you're going to put it in an attribute, you need another type of encoding. So React does do some encoding on the values that you place into HTML attributes, because it doesn't want you to be like escape out, right? So if you put like double quotes, then it's obviously going to do something with that value and turn it into a benign equivalent character. Yeah, so it's just that the JavaScript URL, it's intended functionality. React left behind URLs, and one type of URL is the JavaScript URL. And they didn't, they've known about it forever, the team has. So it's not news to them. It's just, this is like a thing. I mean, like I said, every React code base I've encountered has this vulnerability in it somewhere. Somebody's got some value and they're passing it into an href and then scripts. So props dot data.url. And I've seen this done a few different ways, and I would recommend that you use the built-in URL constructing function. So
agree.
there's a bunch of NPM packages that will help you take a URL and deconstruct it into its component parts as an object. But every one of those does it in a little bit different way. And so underneath the hood, you might be, for example, if I found a vulnerability in URL parse downloaded a million times a week or whatever, and if you put a space at the beginning of a JavaScript URL, it considered it an HTTPS URL. And that's an issue, right? Because if you had a sanitization function where you're trying to test for, is it an HTTP or is it a JavaScript URL? It's really important that you get that right. So I like to use the built-in URL constructor.
In the context of server-side request forgery defense, we need to do URL parsing often. A lot of research came out from Orange to Sci about 3 years ago showing every single major URL parser had problems that could be circumvented for security. Now, a lot of that stuff has been fixed, but which URL parser can I depend on the most? And I think the core language ones are always going to be the best bet. And you know, you're going to get this up to date on folks' browser more often than not on the client these days. So I'm with you 100%.
And it's I've seen a lot of vulns with redirects where somebody parses with one and checks and then parses with a different one when they go to execute. So you end up with this confusion of it was good for this parser, but not good for that one.
Ron, I'm encouraged. I'm almost considering doing just string manipulation. Like I'd want to say, if the URL starts with https:// or http:// then let it ride to avoid some of the parser problems. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to do that, but I've seen a lot of code that does that, but I haven't found easy. I'm not able to get JavaScript or data execution in those examples, even if the URL is bad. So I see that code
then
I like this better. I like this better.
Yeah, because then you've got like, is there white space at the beginning, or is there an upper lowercase character issue? Is there like a space, and does some browser do something with that space, like put it back together? What if you have like Unicode characters that are considered white space or considered null characters? All this stuff, right? So instead of being in that business, which is probably a regex-based business, I don't want to be in any regex-based businesses. I just want to let the URL parse.
SemGrep isn't that bad. SemGrep is a big regex engine. They do it good. All right,
I don't know how that thing works, but that sounds great.
Different story.
Okay, so I'm saying if the protocol for the thing that I'm working with as a URL, the protocol itself is either HTTP or HTTPS, the string, then I'm safe to go here. And so I guess I could do like a little ternary deal here where I say, hey, if everything's all good, then go ahead and use the URL. But otherwise, let's do like an empty string. I see people often put JavaScript void in here, which is interesting, which means that then it still triggers that same warning that you have script injection. So I just went with an empty string. If anybody knows the reason why you would want to put JavaScript void in here instead of an empty string, let me know. But I see that a lot in a lot of places. They'll check the protocol, and if it's not one of the allowed protocols and it's JavaScript instead, replace it with JavaScript void.
When I was developing, I'd usually put a pound in for an empty URL.
Okay,
but whatever.
That makes sense.
I just want to avoid XSS, and that href doing a live prop, which in the first place, props don't even get escaped in create element if you're building a new object from scratch or a new component from scratch. But yeah, that href auto escapes, and an escaped HTML entity escaped URL will still fire accurately in an href context in an anchor tag. Yeah, let's party.
Okay, let's see if we were able to prevent this type of problem very quickly here. Stop. Let's pop over to this dashboard. Okay. So now it's offering to let us download the file. Maybe that's why the JavaScript void. Maybe it's because otherwise it does that in some cases. So here, let's look at what got built by React now that we have this little logic to prevent that particular vulnerability. So down here, now we see the href is blank.
Yeah.
Because we're working with a JavaScript URL and our logic kept it out.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'd probably, if this was our real production code base, I'd probably write a little test case for this, and then ship that and the fix and be done with it. But let's move on quickly to another vulnerability that we have here.
All right. That's fantastic. I like that solution a lot, Ron.
Thanks. I think it's a good one.
It's even easier than building a fresh component to do URL safety. Just quick, 2 lines of code, boom, boom, and you're done. I like that.
Have you looked in the chat at all on YouTube? I haven't looked at all. Has there been any questions or confounded experiences over there?
We're on YouTube. I didn't know we're on YouTube. What's the YouTube link? I'll go look at it right now.
Let me see. Let me try to find.
I'm up on Twitter here, and I have I have Carl and Greg, 2 friends of mine, harassing me over Trex. Go View much better. Fred Booker's like, Go View, and I'm going to say, you don't care about security at all, do you, Fred? Because View is like made the choice that we're just not going to do security. Yeah, we're easy to use. It's great. We're just gonna skip security over here at View. So I'm gonna pass on recommending View quite yet.
View actually has a really extensive how-to for how to code View with security in mind on their website that I really enjoy. So I don't know. I'm gonna start covering some View topics soon.
Ron Paris says they have great guides on View security.
Yeah. On their website, they got a whole dedicated section. React's coming out with some new docs I saw, which is awesome. The old docs are good too, but the new docs, I'm hoping that there'll be a security section there. I might try to contribute to that if it's possible. We'll see.
I was ready to say, don't use View. It's not ready for prime time. You're like, they have great guides to use it safely. So I love being informed myself. Thank you, Ron.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a fan, right? I'm a JavaScript fan. I mean, I don't know how people actually like JavaScript or are excited by it. I don't meet a lot of security teams that are. So maybe skipping Vue and doing all server-side rendering in some other language might be what you want to do.
When I learn how to do time travel, Ron, I'm going back in time. I'm going to find Brandon Ike first, take him out. I'm going to go find Douglas Crockford, take him out. And I'm going to go to the adventures of Java and get that in the browser. So instead of JavaScript, it'd be all Java in the browser, and then I'd be happy.
Yeah, right. The latest innovations coming to React have to do with our server-side rendering capabilities, which I don't know if you remember server-side rendering, but that's kind of where things started.
Wait, you mean like people running JavaScript as a server-side language on purpose?
Yeah. So the new,
all right.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe we'll see more React apps that are doing server-side logic. Okay, so here's the next vulnerability that we were looking at. I think this is the one I posted on Twitter yesterday, and I asked, where's the vuln? And this is kind of a tricky one. When you look at it, I don't know that there obviously is a vuln here. I mean, so what we're doing is we're using styled components, which is an awesome library that makes it really easy to add CSS to an existing React component or author a new React component that has CSS attached. And there's a syntax for doing that supports these function calls using template functions, and it looks kind of cool. It has backticks, but I didn't do that here because I didn't want to confuse everyone. I just went ahead and used objects, which I think more people know about objects.
But I'm already nervous, Ron, because in order to generate dynamic CSS, we need to have an encoder that does CSS hex encoding. And I think pretty much every single framework skips that. And the native function in JavaScript, CSS escape or similar, doesn't support IE11. So I see the teams that I work with that really know this stuff, they've actually written their own CSS escaping function in native JavaScript, which they forked off of Chris Beef's old jQuery encoder, and they manually do CSS encoding by hand. And this is horrible. There's no other solution if I have to do IE11 support. So I just want to be aware as we write this is where React makes me nervous, because in order to generate dynamic style, I need cascading style sheet, hex encoding, which is a really specific format. And I don't see that available much of anywhere in the JavaScript space.
I think a couple of years ago, you sent me that React keylogger that was a React component that had CSS injection, and it would do custom fonts, and it was a keylogger using CSS injection. That's probably the best attack I've seen that uses CSS injection. This one here, it's interesting. There's actually, there's two vulnerabilities. One of them is called out specifically in the style components documentation. In their security section, they talk about CSS escaping, and they talk about that CSS escape function on MDN, and they talk about its limitations. And then I guess someone wrote a polyfill. I don't want to get the name wrong, but one of the popular JavaScript authors for open source wrote a polyfill. And I don't know from a security perspective if it's adequate. Maybe it's not. So, but that's in the style components documentation. So yeah, there's a CSS injection potential here, right? Because we've got props and we're interpolating those into potentially CSS. So yeah, there's also right here the potential for, depending on the data object that we receive as props, there's the potential for cross-site scripting as well. And this only occurs in certain cases where components like this one are doing the rendering of the contents in a particular way, like we are here, where we're using CSS to set the content. It's a little bit of an unusual case. I saw it in a library. I didn't come up with this. I saw it in some library code. Somebody was doing something like this. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of surface this issue. Well, what the issue here is down on line 6, we're saying, hey, we have styled wrapper, which is a component that's going to style some content. And then we're saying, let's use JavaScript spread operator to take the props and just add the props here as key value pairs. So we don't know yet what props are. Props could be any key value pairs potentially.
We're just going to start all of them.
We're just going to start adding in. So let's say one of them was like data. Data would end up being set equal to whatever props.data was.
Ooh,
that's how spread would work. And if we had, I don't know what else we might have here, alt tag, and, that would be set equal to whatever props.alt was. So it's just spreading props out across this particular component. And if we remember, we got our chat object from the attacker, because the chat object came across the network. And one thing that we do in JavaScript, it's starting to change with frameworks like Fastify and some other things that are being built. But historically in JavaScript, a lot of us like to take JSON and then put it into an object storage database like Mongoose. And then we like to pull it back out and just have a completely schemaless interaction with our data. So we can pull data in. Yeah, there's some people build controls. We could do another webinar about that, but this is something I've seen often.
Will you promise me that you'll never endorse
I do not endorse this
JSON use ever again, please?
I don't endorse taking in data from the user and then not applying a schema and storing it in a database and then returning that data to the user interface. But this often happens in JavaScript applications because they support schemaless, right? Schemaless data objects. So you can get them and then send them. And then now that's the weird thing. A couple of years ago, you pointed out, which is like, now you got to do some kind of security in your user interface because you don't really know what these objects are. Potentially they could have extra fields, extra values hanging around on them, and you got to do some validation.
I rarely do client-side schema, but I have my server run a schema during the output of that JSON. I don't want browser-based schema defense. I'm not into, but I think I like all levels of the JSON pipeline to have schema validation. You send me JSON, schema as part of JSON parsing is usually integrated into your parser at that point, or a separate step. And then even on output, when I'm assembling the JSON, if I'm using a common JSON creation library, schema is involved in that. So it's impossible to create or accept a JSON that doesn't fit your schema structure. And schema now allows length limits and all kinds of other advanced things I see in XML schema. So as a security engineer, I heavily endorse schema everywhere. So just the word schemaless design, it's like, no, that's nuts. That's bad design.
You can't move very fast though if you're having to define schemas, man. I mean, I want to get that data, put it in a data store, get it back out, send it around.
Stop it. Stop it, Ron.
I don't have time for sitting there and thinking through what data is this and what type is it, and is it a complex data object or is it a string? I don't know. I just got it from the user. I just can put it in the database, and then I'll get it back and I'll send it to my user interface.
Ron,
I got things to do, man. I got to ship, Jim. You don't build user interfaces like the Manico Global Security Operations Dashboard in a couple of days if you've got to be doing all this schema definition stuff. It's just We agree. You should validate. I agree with you, man. Okay, so we got a couple different vulns. So how do you exploit this type of vulnerability? What you can do is you get these data objects, these schemaless data objects that are coming over. What if we know these are going to get spread out as props? So what if we just set like dangerously set inner HTML?
What kind of life are you living when you use that function, Ron?
A very dangerous one. But this is, imagine when the person's doing the chat with us and they send us their chat data object from their client, they just attached an extra object to it. They just attached this dangerously set inner HTML object to it. And then they set this equal to HTML. And then they just said, let's say it's benign. They just really want you to know that these requests that they're making for help are urgent. So here we've got an urgent request. And if we go back to our user interface, see if we can get that to render.
You know how many of my support emails tell me that this is urgent? Please address this right away, Ron. That'd be great, like all of them. Sorry.
I feel like that comes up, right?
I'm
Look at this.
So
here in the chat, now we have a giant H1, this is urgent, attached to this particular chat message. And the reason why that's happening is because our rendered component had its props spread.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be promiscuously spreading your props. If you're doing that, you're going to end up with issues like dangerously set inner HTML being added as a prop unexpectedly to your JSX component.
I have a lot of problems with that sentence, but please continue, Ron.
Too many specific nouns and verbs, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I feel a little violated. Seriously, a lot of those words I don't like. But we're gonna move on.
Moving on. Okay, let's look at how to fix it. Right? We might as well. What could we do here? This thing's sort of a mess. What could we do to make this more? I don't know. Let's use the React APIs in a way where we're more protected by the defaults, the way that React does escaping. So what I'm going to do is, instead of doing this silly styled wrapper thing, I'm just going to use a trusty div.
Okay.
And then inside the div, instead of putting the props data text inside of CSS context where we have all these escaping issues you mentioned, I'm just going to put it in here like a normal person. Just be like props data text, And now that's going to get HTML entity escaped by default. And I'm not going to have to worry about any sort of special CSS encoding issues. And then when it comes to the color, though, I need some way to set color on this div so that it still has, because each side of the message is a different color. And for some reason, that's encoded in the data.
BG color is blue. You don't do that anymore, do you? You don't put like color directly in attributes anymore. Like 4.01 transitional era when I coded. All right.
React will support the style prop. We can throw in there like color, and we'll get the benefit of this underneath the hood going through the React mechanism for adding styles automatically to the page. And there will be some kind of escaping that occurs there that's proper and contextual. So props.styles. The reason why I know that some of this stuff occurs is because I go and look at that code. Even though I'm a developer, I go and look at some of these security mechanisms in the framework. And I always have this dream that I might find like some, small flaw and then be able to help, get it fixed. But it hasn't yet occurred in the core framework. It's pretty well written, right? It's pretty ironclad, as they might say. Okay, so style wrapper, see ya. We don't need you anymore.
I love it.
We're bye-bye style wrapper. We also, at this point, I don't even need style components. I don't need this whole blob of stuff. This is all unnecessary with my new approach. And now I just have this very simple text message component that takes props color and props data text. And so even if you try to add something else to that data object, it's just going to be ignored.
So it's done securely, but the code looks better too. It looks like much more well-organized, easy to maintain, and easy to understand code as well. This makes sense.
Yeah, the only kind of security code that I've seen that always looks complicated is crypto code for some reason. Always seems to be extra complicated looking and like single letter variable names and stuff. Might just be the crypto guys that like that stuff, but I prefer readable code. I think readable code is an attribute of secure code.
I try to keep crypto mostly out of client side. There are use cases for avant-garde stuff and modern development where some crypto in the browser is valid, but overall I'm doing it server side. and I'm trying to use well-vetted libraries and keep them up to date. Like the big one I like these days is something like Google Tink is outstanding with key management integration. Is there something in the world of JavaScript I can recommend for
the one I always hear is libsodium. Is libsodium a native JavaScript library? I don't know. It might be one of these ones where it uses like a C++ under the hood deal. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure libsodium's on NPM. Okay, so
Libsodium is written by Dr. Dan Bernstein, who's pretty much he's a professor of cryptography at University of Chicago, and he's legit. He is hardcore. So
is that the guy who wrote did he write a QMail and those other, maybe, I'm not sure. Okay.
I know for sure he wrote libsodium, and it's one of the best practices for crypto libraries in the C and C++ world. So someone forked libsodium to Node.js. This is a direct port of libsodium to Node.js.
Check this out. They used WebAssembly to compile it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Then so it's the same source code. It's just WebAssembled and then executed in a JavaScript environment.
Okay, that actually hurts me a little bit, but let's
moving on. Okay,
let's move on quickly.
Okay, so here we go. Now we don't have cross-site scripting anymore. Instead we have these values that are benign.
Ron, can I get that output text in chartreuse though, please?
Could we? Does color still work? I'm gonna try. I'm gonna make sure color still works. That's a good point. We don't have a regression here in our color support. I'm gonna head over to my code editor.
That was a reference to Office Space. That was a little Office.
You don't actually need it to be different colored. I can change it for you. Let's see. Maybe this one. Let's just make it like red, right? Have you ever seen that the color Chuck Norris renders as orange?
Excuse me?
Chuck Norris.
I would like that color then, actually.
You know, there's all these old, light gray is like darker than dark gray. All these weird HTML color names. And I think Chuck Norris is orange.
That's the color I want in this app then. And that's the color I'm going to use for every website I build from now on. I'm just going to make all colors Chuck Norris.
I don't know if it still works. Let's see.
Let's see if it works. Let's do this. Wow. By the way, we're winding down once we're at the Chuck Norris color level, that shark has jumped. We've jumped the shark here, and we're about to wind up. But I want to see it. I want to see it.
I don't know if my color rendering is working here. I'm gonna inspect element on this one and see if I have color rendering. Oh, did I see an orange go by? No, that's just regular orange.
In orange because of a hard-coded color Chuck Norris from legacy Netscape 3 era, I believe, is where that kind of stuff first started showing up. That's like Netscape Navigator 3.0 stuff, early 4.01 transitional style color codes that we can hard code directly in markup, even out of style in HTML. This is before style, when I can do stuff like BG color equals blue as a widget attribute. This is real old school, but we're about winding down, folks. Yeah. While Ron's doing his Chuck Norris, I want to let you know Ron is a teacher in the world of JavaScript. We're generating interest for Ron's classes. If you have interest in having your developers take a React security class with Mr. Paris, please send me email. I'm jim@manacode.com. You can also just email Ron directly, ron@manacode.com. And just in general, go forth and write secure code. I know several of you on this call are already secure coding experts. Continue your great work and passing the word. It's important what we all do to help make the world a more secure place. And I'm on team defense. I know Ron's on team defense. Not a lot of us out there, so keep writing secure code, everybody. And Ron, I love you, baby. Thank you for doing this with me and sharing some of your knowledge with the AppSec and React community. I appreciate your time a great deal.
Yeah, so we got some red here. So I think if we do a part 2 of this, we should look at these data objects and look at what really went wrong with that data object and what could we be doing on the back end to be doing like some kind of schema validation or how can we add some defense layers there so that dangerously set under HTML doesn't end up being a spread prop.
We can do this again next week. Let's pick it up next week then. Let's do this again.
All right, yeah. Well, that sounds good, Jim. I appreciate you joining me as always.
I salute you, Ron Parrish. And thank you all. Again, if you have questions for us, hit me up at jim@manacode.com. You can just respond to the invite you got for this to talk to Ron. we would love to be able to give you a little React teaching. And by the way, we'll do a freebie hour for you anytime as well, just to generate interest within your company. Or just if you have just questions for us that are not business related, we're always happy to answer questions as well.